In last week's video tutorial, I showed you how to create a wood grain design with curvy, beautiful knots to create the texture. Now we're going to use that same arced shape to create leafy designs with different effects. First, I'll show you how to quilt an all-over meander to add texture to your quilt. Then we'll see how lining them up in a row can create a ferny look for your quilt. And then finally, we'll tiptoe into thread painting as I show you how to really build up around that shape and add some pops of color. Plus, I'll demonstrate it on a long arm and a sewing machine, so let's get to it. First up is a leafy meander. This design is a little curvy and a little bit pointy, but it still gives a beautiful texture to your quilt. I'm going to start by quilting the leafy meander in this green portion of my quilt, quilting an arc that goes out to a point and returns back to where I started from. So it's kind of like a pointy teardrop shape. Then I'm going to echo that same shape, working my way around the outside and back to where I started. But once I have that first shape, I'm going to echo it 1 or 2 times, and then I'm going to quilt the same shape in a different direction. Since I'm quilting this design as a meander, I want to make sure that all the leaves go in different directions. Once I point it in a certain direction, I'm going to echo it and then continue on. As I start to add more leaves, I'm going to get to a point where I can't echo my way all the way back to the bottom. I'm just going to echo until I get close to another quilted line and then change direction. I don't want all those lines coming together because it's really going to pull attention to that area. Now, the tricky thing about quilting a meander is filling in a defined area. You're going to be dealing with corners and boundaries, and so that's why it's ideal that we're practicing in this leaf. So as I'm quilting my leaves, I want to make sure I handle any gaps before I move on. So I'm going to get back down to where those gaps are. How am I going to do that? I'm going to use echoing to maneuver my way around the area. I'm just going to echo, echo, echo until I get there. I can echo what I've just quilted, I can echo what I previously quilted, I can echo another echo line. Most important thing is just to see where I need to end up at and use my echoing to get there. Now when I get to areas that are a little too small for a leaf, let's say in this pointy area there's not quite enough room for a full leaf, you can add a partial leaf or a smaller leaf. It really doesn't matter as long as you fill in that whole area as much as possible. And if I happen to get stuck, I'm going to use traveling to maneuver my way out of there, so that I can move on and fill in the next area. I really want to make sure that all my gaps are filled in before I move on, because what's going to happen is I'm going to get to the end and realize I forgot a part and have to go back and fill it in. And nobody likes that. And then once I filled in the gaps and echo to where I finally have room, I'm going to quilt another leaf going in a different direction and continue on. So as you're quilting your leaves, don't stress out about making them perfectly symmetrical on each side. That doesn't matter. I just want to point at the top and a wider area in the middle. So if it swoops in on one side and swoops out on the other, it's completely fine. And also, as you're echoing, if you keep that spacing consistent with your echo lines, it'll keep the individual leaves from standing out. Instead, you'll get a beautiful all-over texture, which is really what we're going for. Now this design was actually featured in the very first Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along, and I have a video tutorial where I show you how to change directions easily with this. So if you're having trouble with this design, you can definitely check out that video. But basically we're quilting that same shape, we're echoing, and we're filling in the area, using traveling to maneuver around and making sure we don't leave any gaps behind. I'm also using the foot of my machine as a guide. As the foot of my machine approaches a previously quilted line, I know it's time to stop and change directions. Whether that means I'm adding another leaf or adding more echo lines or just adding a shape to fill in the gap, it doesn't matter. Now, whether you're quilting along with me on the panel or using your own quilt, you're gonna come to situations where your area gets noticeably smaller, like it is in this leaf. As I approach that narrower point, my tendency is going to be to try to make those leaves smaller to make them fit. But I actually don't wanna do that because that change in density will draw attention to that part of the quilt. So if I want the texture to be the same, I'm gonna really focus on keeping the lines spaced the same. And that means I'll have to quilt some partial leaves or add in some echoes, but I'm still going to try to keep the spacing the same. And there I have that beautiful leafy meander filling in that area of my quilt. I love how it gives it a pointy yet curvy kind of look and really adds some beautiful texture. Before we move on to different ways to use this shape, I want to show you a slight variation. All you have to do is switch out one little thing. So in this area, I'll show you how to create the paisley just to give it a different look. My first shape is going to look like a teardrop, pointed on one end and round on the other. And just like the leafy meander, I'm going to echo that shape a couple times and then quilt my next one going in a different direction. As soon as I start to approach a previously quilted line, I'm going to stop and change direction and either quilt another paisley or add some more echoing. The trick here is I want to keep those lines consistently spaced and fill in all the gaps. It's almost like I say that all the time. Now, one thing I do slightly different is when I quilt my paisley, mine tend to kind of loop over a little bit. They kind of droop or angle. I like the little bit of curviness it has, but you don't have to do that. Your paisleys might be more straight up and down. They might hang over more. It really doesn't matter. Just quilt the shape and echo around it. And if you get any weird gaps in between your paisleys, you know what to do. Just echo around, fill it in, and continue on. I'm using this bright pink contrasting thread color so that you can see the quilting. But if you're quilting along with me on the panel, use the light green thread for this area. It's going to give you a beautiful texture and you'll still be able to see the quilting. All right, I'm going to keep going, filling this in so you can see how beautiful the paisley looks. Such a beautiful, quick, and fun design to add a curvy look to your quilts. Well, now that we've seen this leafy design in an all-over meander, let's see how making it more regular in its placement will create a really cool fern-like effect. In this example, instead of quilting them all in different directions, I'm going to line them up along a seam or a previously quilted line to create a fern or a plume kind of effect. What's really neat about this design is that it will really draw attention to a particular area of your quilt instead of just giving it an all-over texture. Well, I'm going to use this part of my quilt to act as the spine, and that's really going to give it just a beautiful texture in here. Now, this is a little bit of a larger area, so if you wanted to, you could echo around the outside to make it a little bit smaller, or you can create your leaves and then echo around those to fill in the area. Let's see how to do it on a long arm. This step is optional, but I like to go ahead and stitch along that main seam just to kind of hold it in place before I start adding my leaves. But you don't have to. So now I'm going to start adding my leaf shapes. I'm going to travel back up a bit, give myself some room, and create that first leaf. Now I'm going to make these kind of big because I want it to really be an element to the quilt. So I'm going to quilt it so that it almost touches the other side and then returns back. I'm using echoing to fill in the gaps between the leaves and fill in the gaps between the leaf and the edge of the area. I want to make sure that's all filled in. But if you wanted to, you could wait to the end and echo them all at the same time. I just like to do it as I go. The shape of my leaf is actually just a little bit different. Instead of being a perfectly round arc, it kind of has a curve to it, and that's going to help the leaves kind of nestle up against each other. I'm going for more of a ferny type of look. It's up to you to decide how big you want to make your leaves. You can make them wider so that they fill up the area faster, or you can make them skinnier to add more of them, more like a plume feather. Now, unlike the all over texture, this is really going to draw attention to a portion of the block. So I'm going to use this to frame elements I want to show off or places that I want to draw attention to. And what I have is a beautiful kind of ferny motif look that's really going to draw attention to this area. The pointy and irregular areas that we're filling in makes this perfect for the plume feather, which is the same basic idea, except we're making them a lot skinnier to fill in the area. If you want to quilt that in one of your leaves, I have a whole tutorial on how to quilt the plume feather. Check out the video and it shows you how to do it. Now, if you have an area of your quilt that you really want to show off, you want to add some beautiful texture, you want to quilt the heck out of it, then this next variation is going to be for you. Now, while it does incorporate a lot of traveling, the effect is really cool. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to use that variation to add a pop of texture into this dark blue area of my quilt. I'm going to start by quilting that same leaf shape that we did for the meander, but I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Then I'm going to add some echo lines that are going to be really close. They're almost going to be like traveling on top, but not quite. And I'm going to build it up by adding several of those lines. And it's okay if those lines overlap each other. We're going for a nice thready look here. So just keep going until that center seems to pop out. Now I'm ready to add my next one. So I'm going to travel along the side of my leaf and get back to that point. Then I'm going to create the same shape again, starting from that point. So it's almost like it's going to swoop out and then connect with that previous leaf. I want to make sure that those leaves are touching because it's going to make it easier to travel in between them when we get to the next step. Well, now that I have that, I'm going to do the same thing, echoing around it, really building up that thread to make that center pop. Now, once I feel like it has enough thread built up around it, it's time to add my next leaf. But unlike the meander, where that leafy design is going in all different directions, these leaves are going to go the same direction because I want them to touch and nestle together. So I'm going to add my next one on the other side of that first leaf. Having those leaves touch means that all that traveling that I'm putting around them will start to blend together, and what we'll start to see is the unquilted center starting to pop. But just like the other design, I don't want to leave any areas unquilted, so I'm going to use traveling to get to this gap and fill it in. If I don't have room to add a whole leaf, I'll just add a partial one, but I'm still going to echo around it and really build up the outside. And you can start to see that center really starting to pop out and all that quilting kind of smashing down the area around it, and it looks really great. The trickiest thing about this design is trusting that it's going to look okay. So if you're not sure, just take a moment, quilt that first shape, and then start traveling around it and add your next one. Since there's already so much traveling on this design, it's really easy to work your way around the area because you don't have to worry about that extra line showing up. So I'll use traveling to get to my next area and then add my next leaf. And just like the Leafy Meander, that shape doesn't have to be symmetrical, doesn't have to be perfectly round. It can angle out or curve in and out. We just want to make sure that it's wider in the center and pointier at the top. Let's be honest, this isn't a design you're going to want to do on every quilt for every person. Save this technique for areas that you really want to show off or for quilts you're making for people you really love. And while it does take a little bit longer because of all the traveling, the result is so cool. So I'm going to keep going, keep filling it in so you can see the finished look. Now, as I approach that pointy center, I'm going to do the same thing I did with my Leafy Meander. I'm not going to make the shape smaller to fit the area. I'm just going to use traveling and echoing to fill it in with the same size leaf. And check out that beautiful effect. Here's what's great about this design. If you're struggling with traveling, this is perfect practice because there's so much thread buildup, you're not going to notice if a line isn't perfect. Plus, if you get done and you think, man, I wish I would have filled in that area a little bit more, it's no problem to maneuver your way around and go back and fill it in. What's really neat is when you're done, you have that beautiful kind of textured look that really adds some detail to your quilt. But if you like playing with threads as much as I do, you don't have to stop there. You can add really cool detail by incorporating another thread color. Again, this is probably a little bit over the top, but I want to show you how to do it because it's one of my favorite techniques. So I have the framework all put down with that lighter color, and I have my contrasting pop of color. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use it to quilt just along the inside edge of my leaf, just to build up a little bit of that color, and then I'll travel on to the next one and do the same. And it's okay if it overlaps that previous quilting. That's going to help it blend in together and kind of give it that really cool thread painted effect. Now once I have that one filled in, I'm simply going to travel to the next one and do the same. Now you might think crossing over that different color thread will really make it pop out, but it won't. Since there's so much of the other thread, it's going to disappear. This really is a subjective process. I want you to keep going until you think it looks great and then move on. You might want to put more color or less, it doesn't matter. Do what you think looks great. And that's why I love this glide thread. It has just a little bit of sheen, which gives your quilting a little bit more depth and makes it look so pretty. I'm gonna keep going, filling in these little leaves, and then you'll see what it looks like when I'm all done. And when you're done, you have a beautiful thread painted design that's really gonna add beautiful texture to your quilt. Now it's your turn. If you're quilting along with me on the custom panel designed for this challenge, fill in the areas highlighted in red with the design of your choice. You can quilt each section separately or combine them to make bigger sections to fill in. You can echo the area, you can add some thread painting, create paisleys, or even plume feathers. Really, it's up to you. And don't forget, I have a free downloadable PDF with quilting diagrams and tips that will really show you how to create this design. Or if you need a little bit more help, you can download the expanded resource, which has even more pictures and even more quilting diagrams. I'll be back next week where I'll show you how to create a flowery design with different effects. Until then, happy quilting. For more machine quilting inspiration, check out fmqchallenge.com. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any videos.